Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Today I had initially been planning on doing a video about Bell Witch, which is a haunting out of Tennessee that happened a really long time ago, and it happened to the Bell family, and even a former president, well, he wasn't a president at the time, but a former president was even haunted by it momentarily. So if you haven't heard about it, definitely look into it because I am still working on that video. So I plan on having it edited and out hopefully this weekend. But I thought today we could just do like a general paranormal chat, I guess. So previous video was everything about the Merlin house that I hadn't covered already, talking about like the physical manifestations. And I guess from there, like really for me, like where the paranormal stuff ended, it hasn't obviously ended, but where it ended being like terrifying was we moved out of the Merlin house and a lot of the activity stopped, and this particular house that we had moved into was actually very like calm in that way. Like I didn't feel creeped out by really any of the rooms. The dining room for some reason did creep me out a little bit, and that was it, but like the rest of the place was totally fine. Now that's not to say that stuff didn't happen that was weird. I remember being outside one time, we had like little, just those like little cheap pools you can get at Fred Meyer or Fry's or any Kroger. So like those little cheap pools that you can get, and I had one out in the yard, and I remember one time like it was really strange. Just all of a sudden there was like a splash in the water. Like I was in it, I was just sitting there because I did that a lot, just being weird. Like I would just sit there, and there was like a splash in the water. And so like I thought maybe like a frog jumped in or like a rock came through, like came into it somehow or like something, but there was nothing. I remember all of a sudden there was just like this overwhelming feeling of like dread, and I suddenly just got super terrified. And I had, the oddest thing was like this is kind of when my fear of death started. So my relationship with the paranormal is a little bit odd because on one hand, I don't know scientifically if I can believe in it. On the other hand, I want to because I'm afraid of death. And then on the other, I kind of don't want to believe it because then it means that there is something after death and I still don't know what it is. So I just got all of a sudden like this overwhelming sense of just absolute terror about dying. And it was the weirdest thing, like it just came out of nowhere after that splash. And I remember I tried like a few times to like recreate it. Like I like went out there and I just sat and like I waited for the splash, and like it never really happened again. Yeah, it was just strange. I think after that, a lot of stuff that happened I just chose to ignore because I was so in denial that anything was gonna happen again, because I was like, we left that house, something cannot happen, it can't happen anymore. But small stuff did happen throughout the rest of my adolescence and then into now my adulthood, but a lot of it was just, it seemed like it was very sporadic. It wasn't like something big would happen. And I do remember it got to the point where like, I think I just started to ignore this stuff. And one of my friends made a good point that's like, doesn't that stuff scare you? And I'm like, before I could answer, she's like, well, I guess probably not because it's always been happening. And that's kind of like, it's just become background noise for me in a lot of ways. Like I hear weird sounds in the house or like unexplained knocking or footsteps, and I choose to just ignore it because I'm like, I'm not even going to acknowledge the fact that this is happening right now. And it's to the point where I will almost like brainwash myself that it's not happening because I don't want to have to admit that it is. As I've started this channel and I've started talking more about it, like I said, I feel like I'm getting more sensitive to it again. And that's kind of twofold. Like in some ways I kind of want to explore that, and then in other ways I really don't. I would like to research it and be sensitive to it, but be able to control what I experience. But that's not in any sort of field, if you want to call it that, that's not something that you can do. And so I am kind of in this place where I'm like, do I keep trying to dig further into this, or do I let it go and I just stop talking about it entirely? And I don't want to stop talking about it entirely, and I don't want to just let it go, but it's like it's kind of like an internal fight of like, I spent my whole life after the Merlin house fighting it. Like, why am I now gonna let everything back in? A really long time ago, actually, I want to say, I'm gonna look at this book to see if there's like a copyright, but I want to say that I had to be, I was in high school, So in like 2008, so I must have been right out of high school because I graduated in 2007, and so this was printed in 2008. But anyway, this really old, like it looks worn because I've just kept it in the bottom of stacks of books. But I actually got this book, which is Buckland's Book of Spirit Communications by Raymond Buckland, and I got this because I went through a phase right after high school where I decided that, you know, I hadn't experienced anything scary and nothing was really wrong. So I bought this and I was going to get into it again. Kind of the same thing happened. I got a lot of trepidation about it and I was really scared of it. And I am still scared of that type of stuff. But I think, I don't know, I have a hard time with some of like the ghost hunting shows and even just some of the like the ghost hunting YouTube channels, because they're always like, oh, don't be like, if you're afraid of it, you're not, you know, really in tune with the paranormal. Like, actually, I think if you are afraid of it, you are probably in tune with it because you can feel things that you can't explain. You can hear and see things that maybe other people can't, and you start to question your sanity, and science tells you it's not real, and it's just, I think that it's normal to be afraid of it. And so I guess my point in that is that I'm okay to admit that I'm afraid of it. I think everybody in some sense is. I don't think there's a single person that actually believes in this stuff that isn't somewhat terrified of it. So for me, like lately, I have been experiencing things just sporadically. So for instance, where I work is an old location and it's been a number of things over the years. And I'm not going to talk about my workplace mainly just because, one, I don't want to put any sort of negative, I guess it's not press because it's not like I'm famous, but you know what I mean? Like, I don't want to put any negative vibes out there about my workplace because it's a fantastic place and it's a place that people can go to feel safe, and I don't want something I say to come across as wrong. So please, if you do know where I work, please know that I mean this in the best of intentions. I'm not trying to say that it's a scary place, but it does have a storied history, and I think that it's very possible and likely that it is haunted. And there have been employees that in other departments that I work with who have told me about some of the haunting stuff. In fact, we even had a complaint recently about an area being haunted, and you know, it's interesting. So I started to think about this earlier this week when I was at work, and the building that I work in is newer, and so obviously it's probably not haunted, but there have been weird things that have happened. Like when I've worked late at night, there was this time that I went down the hallway to go towards the bathrooms, which is also towards like the lobby and the exit, and you could hear like footsteps coming down the hallway towards you, and I was just like, I just assumed that somebody else was working late too. Then they just stopped, and then there was nobody there, and I was like, well, that was weird. But I just assumed they probably went into like their office or something, and that was it. Like, of course I'm gonna rationalize it. That's what we do as humans. We try to put something real into it so that we think that we can understand it. I had a weird experience where I had gone up top towards the main part of the resort, and we have a couple of places that are kind of special, just spiritual, like insightful places for people to go and think about things or meditate or whatever they want to do. And I think that there's some good energy there, but I think that there is very good potential that there could be bad energy there. And I remember very early on in my time there, I went up and I was walking around and I had time to myself after I had just gone through like this spiritual, I don't know what to call it, healing or experience. I went through this whole spiritual thing where, you know, the person that was sensitive to, I don't know if it's spirituality, I don't know if it's ghosts that she's sensitive to, I don't know what it is, but she did say that I have a sensitivity towards that. And so I had a lot of weird stuff on my mind anyway, so this is kind of how I tried to rationalize it. But like, I remember I was out walking and I was the only one out there because it was really hot. It was in the middle of summer. It was like 118 degrees, and I was in like this long sleeve, long dress trying to cover my tattoos and stuff. And it was nice because it was shady and there was a wind. So like, even though it was super hot, it just was like, I don't know, it was just like calm and nobody was around. I felt like all of a sudden somebody come up behind me and like tap me on the shoulder. And it wasn't just like one tap where you could be like, oh, muscle twitch. It was like two distinct taps. And I remember like at first I was like, I don't know, like I kind of turned a little bit, but I was like, I know there's nobody out here. I don't know, it was just very strange. Yeah, so that's kind of like my ramblings about the paranormal. But anyway, I pulled out this old book and I thought that I might kind of start taking a look at it. I have some, it's interesting because I don't remember ever reading any of it, but I have pages that I've like dog-eared, and I even have writing in parts of it because there's lessons and stuff, and so I don't recall any of it, which to me, I mean, I have a really good memory, and to me, like, the fact that I don't recall this was just proof of how much I just decided that, like, I fought my whole life to get away from this, and I'm not going to deal with it again. So I am going to try to get back into it and read it. And it's not to say that I want to contact spirits. It's not to say that I want to start trying to be somebody who can reach out to the dead or anything like that. I think that I'm very skittish when it comes to that stuff. For instance, you know, I was saying that the room that's my daughter's room, if I go in there on my own, I get this overwhelming sense of like, I'm not allowed in there, and it makes me very panicky, and I leave. But if she goes in with me, it's fine because it's her space. And we had some weird stuff happening in there when we first moved into this house, and I actually went through and I burned sage, and I had her be the one to say, like, I dumbed it down a lot for a little kid so that she just thought it was fun, but like I had her say some stuff that was basically like, this is my room. So it's almost like I'm not allowed in there right now. And that's fine. Like, it is her space, but as a mother, you have to be able to go and get things out of your child's room and stuff. So eventually I will have to figure out how to deal with that. But the weird stuff that was happening here was very similar to Merlin house stuff. I would get tapped on the leg, or I would hear people talking in the distance that weren't anywhere here. And it's not like I hear voices in my head. It's very obvious that it's not in my head. So the things that were happening here were interesting, and you know, I'd feel like a cold rush of air, or like one time on the baby monitor, the temperature in there was 70 and it went down to 32 and then back up to 70. And of course that could have been a glitch, but it was very strange, especially because there's this one corner of the room that feels very off to me, and that's where the baby monitor sits. And I don't know if it's just high EMF because of even the baby monitor, or the fact that there's an outlet there. Something just feels off in there. And we were sitting at the table one night for dinner, and I was pretty freaked out by stuff that had been happening in the house. And all of a sudden, like, my daughter just starts talking about Tiana, and I'm like, I don't, and I know that the first thing that you're gonna think is The Princess and the Frog, but we had yet to let her watch it because we thought it was probably too scary for her. We were afraid that like the voodoo parts of it would be too scary for her, or just in general, we thought it would probably be too scary. So we had yet to let her watch it, and nobody else had let her watch it either. And we don't know anybody named Tiana, and so it was very odd. And so I was like, what? And so she repeated it again, and then she pointed up at the ceiling, and she was like, she's up there. And I was like, who? And she was like, Tiana. And like, she just says this deadpan, and like my face probably looked like I was ready to run out of this house. And I was like, what, like, is she big or is she small? And she's like, she's big. And she was like, she's a grown-up like you. And I was like, oh, good. And of course I don't react to her because I don't want to scare her. And she was like, she goes outside and she comes back in and she plays on the ceiling. And I'm just like, oh, like, that's just, it's so creepy. And so then is when I decided, like, we're saging the room, like, it's done. And so we did, and things got actually really, like, much better then. And I researched things like trying to find out if there were like deaths here, and the house that we live in is only a few years old, so it was like nobody had died here, there were no accidents in the area, like nothing, and I couldn't find the name or anything. And the only thing that I could think is, like, you know, Southern Arizona has such a huge history, and like, I don't know, like maybe that was something that had been here before, or maybe that's the thing from the Merlin house and now she can see it too, or she communicates with it too. And I don't know, I never gave a name to it. I always assumed that it was a male because of the figure that I saw, and just the way that it felt to me, and like the way that it still feels to me when I feel that is very indicative of a male presence to me. And so I don't know what it was, and it was terrifying though to hear a 2-year-old say that. And it wasn't just like gibberish. For a 2-year-old, she's pretty articulate, and that's not just because I'm her mother, but like she's pretty good at like explaining things, and so it wasn't like I was misunderstanding her, it was just creepy. For a while, activity got kind of crazy in here with the coffin nails until I finally did just like a pseudo cleansing on them, where I burned incense and I put salt on them, and I actually set them in a Himalayan salt lamp like to clear the energy. And like right after, as you know, during that video, weird stuff was happening, and I've not had a single problem with my batteries ever since then. And so I put them in a circle of salt till I could deal with the problem. I set them outside of the salt just to see like what would happen, and I got a really bad vibe from them, and it was just creepy. I could feel like this energy from the Grants Pass area, but it wasn't something from the Merlin house, but it was similar. It was like, I don't know how to explain this, but it was almost like the energy shared something, like it shared a location almost. It was very odd, and ever since like clearing it up a little bit, like everything's been fine. But I am hoping to eventually start getting into more like live research stuff. I'm hoping that we move back to Oregon someday and that I can go back to some places that were creepy. Definitely not the Merlin house. I have no desire to go within 10 feet of that property. Definitely some other things, like the high school that I went to had some weird stuff that happened. There were houses that were haunted in the area that I grew up in, and just random things that I want to explore, and cemeteries. And when I say exploring cemeteries, I mean that in the most respectful way. Like, I'm not out there trying to stir stuff up. I'm not out there yelling or making noise or anything. Like, in fact, for me, in a lot of ways, we lived really close to a cemetery, and I went from being so terrified of them to like all of a sudden I found a lot of peace in them. And I would go and I would just sit there to almost meditate, like just to disconnect from my world and just sit with the past. And so for me, it's not to go and be like one of those jackasses that's trying to stir things up and, you know, like come attack me and like none of that stuff. Like I just want to be respectful, and I hope that as this channel grows, I can start to do that stuff and you guys can experience it with me. But until then, that's really all I had, was just this random chit chat. I will have the video of the Bell Witch up this weekend, so look forward to that. It'll be probably a shorter video just because there are so many videos about it and there's movies about it. So I just want to do like a quick condensed version that gives you like the stuff that I found most interesting about it. So that'll be soon. And then I was initially, and I probably talked about this before, I was going to do a video about this town in Ohio that a lot of really sad things happened in, and I still think that it's a weird thing, but in light of not talking about people's sad ends, I guess is like one way to put it, I don't really want to do that. And so out of respect, I will talk about what I think it could have been, or from a paranormal perspective, what some people could have thought it was. There's no really like conspiracy theory about it. I don't know that anybody else has looked into this, and so it does still interest me. I am still going to do something about it, but I'm trying to figure out how to tackle that subject delicately. A few of you also wanted me to buy a haunted doll and be with it for 24 hours. I will totally try to figure out how to do that. And until then, make sure if you liked this video to like it and subscribe. And until next time, be safe and don't forget, don't turn out the light.